and to our band. We never know the hidden talent that exists in this universe. So thank you for choosing to be here today, part of this spiritual community, whether you're in person, on Zoom, or watching us discreetly on YouTube. I love it that we have so many choices. And for those who watch it later, you're welcome too. So this month, as you've been listening to our guys sing, this exploration of freedom, it's the theme for the whole month. And so now we start digging into the details of freedom from. And today's talk title is Freedom from External Limitations. Yeah, this is something that every single one of us, when we were 2, and we learned the word no, we used quite liberally to express our "I don't think so, Tim" thing. And so that's that something that's in each one of us that looks to say, no, I'm pushing against that because that's a limitation I don't believe is appropriate for me. Or maybe I'm just being stubborn, but who cares? Because really it's about recognizing our agency and our autonomy and our ability to say, no, I occupy this space and you can't interfere, you can't impose. And when we're 2, we do it with our parents, and we're supposed to because that's part of the growing up thing. And yet, what is this notion that external limitations exist for us? It's an experience for sure, right? It's something we all deal with. But how real are they? How real are those external limitations? And I want you to think about what your relationship is with your experience of external limitations, things that push against you or seem to, and keep you from doing stuff that you want to do. This is not an easy question. So I want you to actually notice that and notice your thoughts about what these external limitations are. Because we've all got them. We've all got this belief that we can't do something because. So our good friends, the Stoics, have a lot to say about this, particularly William Irvine, who wrote a book called The Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy. And doesn't that sound funny, Stoic joy, right? No. Irvine wrote that there's a trichotomy of control. And if you think about it, it's probably true for you too. There are things over which you have complete control, which are your thoughts, your goals, your values, what is your way of being in the world. And then there are things over which you have absolutely no control, like whether it's actually going to rain at your house or not. And things over which you have some control. So, what's the value of fretting and worrying about things that you have no control over? We have control over the things we have control over, which is how we are in the world. And we have some control over some other things. And then there's this whole category of other things that we spend an awful lot of time worrying about and fretting about and fussing against that we actually can't affect. Now, I've said that, and you're all nodding like what I've said is true. So I want to talk about gravity. So is gravity one of those things over which you have some control, or is it a thing you have no control over? Sounds like a trick question. Good answer. Because truthfully, Gravity is one of those things that you have some control over because you can decide how to interact with it. It is a trick question. We get to decide what success, what effective operation means for us. You know, I count on gravity. I want it to keep me, hold me down and keep me on the earth. I don't necessarily count on gravity when I trip and fall down. But I count on gravity and I work with it when I am moving in the world, when I'm engaging with the world. And I recognize that, gravity does win if I trip, usually. And so that's one of those things that looks like we have no control, but in fact, we do have some control. And those of you who have practiced yoga or Tai Chi or any of the more forceful martial arts, and this is probably true for dance too, although I don't have any experience with that, you're always working with your center of gravity, where your physiology is in relation to this thing called gravity. And you work with that because if you are balanced, then you can do stuff that most people would not consider normal because you are working with gravity. And it's even true, if you think about it, when you're walking on ice or on slick, wet tile, or maybe hiking on an uneven terrain, you're paying attention, you're noticing where you are in relationship to the ground, and you're probably dropping your center of gravity a little bit to give yourself better control. And body workers, not that I'm one of those, but body workers have told me that if they pay attention to their center of gravity and they work with gravity, they can actually have a career of body working rather than burning themselves out by overreaching and overstressing and overstretching and, screwing up their skeletal system because they're not paying attention to their relationship with gravity. So here's this thing that we think is immutable and unchangeable and in charge of us. But in fact, we do have some control over it because we decide how we're going to interact with it. So I want to back up and ask you the question again. What about things you have no control over? What about things you have some control over? Does your universe shift? And I want to circle back to a story that I suspect most of you have heard. Maybe not in a while, but you've heard it before. And it's the story of the mature elephant in a zoo or in a circus. And the handler for the elephant, the elephant's got a rope around its ankle or foot or whatever it is. And it's on a rope and it's tied to a little stake in the ground. Now you know and I know that that elephant is big and strong and powerful and could actually move. Except that rope was on its ankle or foot when it was small, and it couldn't then. So that elephant learned when it was tiny that it couldn't move because of that rope. And so even though now the situation has changed and that elephant really could walk away, it doesn't know that. Psychologists call that learned helplessness. We all have the experience of thinking we don't have control, thinking we don't have freedom, because it's something we learned once. It's something what used to be true maybe, and we believe it still, and it isn't necessarily so, but we believe it. And so because we believe it, it's true for us. That's just kind of how it works. So my question for each one of us today is, what circumstances do we each have in our lives where we have told ourselves we are powerless when we're really not? Where have we learned helplessness? Where have we learned that we can't, when in fact we actually can? I like the Stoics. I'm kind of a fan of the Stoics. And one of my fangirl things is the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. And he was like the most powerful guy in the world then. And he was a philosopher king, which is particularly cool. And he journaled, which is also particularly cool. And he had a journal that he didn't really intend for anybody else to read. It was kind of like his secret notes to himself. And that journal is called the Meditations. And in the Meditations, in the daily Stoic reading this week, he wrote, remember, he's writing for himself. He's not writing for the universe. On those mornings when I struggle with getting up, keeping this thought in mind, I am awakening to the work of a human being. Why am I annoyed that I am going to do what I'm made for? The very things for which I was put into the world. Or was I made for this? Snuggling under the covers and staying warm. It's so pleasurable. Was I made for pleasure? In short, to be coddled, or was I made to exert myself? Boy, that's easy. It is so easy. He sounds like a human, right? Because it's so easy to have a lazy streak or to have a preconceived notion that I can't or I shouldn't, or it's more comfortable to not. And it's part of the human condition, I think, to decide whether to chill or to engage in the reason you believe you're here on the planet. Why are you here? What was the goal Marcus Aurelius worked toward? It wasn't to be the emperor. It wasn't to rule the empire. That was just his day job. His goal was to be a good, fair, honest, and honorable human. Most of us do have to get out of bed to do that, including him. So, as kind of food for thought, right? Because we have to decide that we wish to exert ourselves to move in the direction we claim we want to be, to experience that thing of freedom, because we're deciding that. And I don't want you to think that I'm actually like speaking because I figured it out, because I haven't. Because I reached a certain age this past year that society has historically considered old. And I've talked about how I was surprised to discover that I actually had an unconscious belief about what that meant, and that I was having body experiences to remind me that I had a thought that I didn't know that I had. And so my body is informing me that I have these beliefs. Kind of like the car that doesn't break down till the warranty expires. And I'm still working on resolving that. Because once your physiology, which is form, decides that it's going to enact something you believe, it takes some work to change it. So there it is. And so I'm continuing to work with this belief system I have, and with this experience I'm having in my physiology that shows me that my beliefs, even if I didn't know about them, are in the way of my freedom. That's just where they are. And so because I've had the birthdays, some part of me believes that I should start being a little bit decrepit, and that's just useless to me. I'm sorry, it is. And, that's kind of that spot that I'm in. Now, my mom had a fear of being old and useless. And because of that, she was still working when she was 76. And she happened to love what she did, and the people loved her, and and it wasn't terribly hard, and she felt like she mattered. She had something she could do. And that was her way of avoiding that feeling of decrepitness, that feeling of being unable or inadequate or less than somehow. And so it's always a frame of reference. How do we decide what we are capable of? And the answer is we have to decide, right? So, Dr. Ernest Holmes, in the Science of Mind Declaration of Principles, he wrote it in 1927. He wrote, "We believe in the healing of the sick through the power of this mind. We believe in the control of conditions through the power of this mind." These two statements give a lot of people a lot of grief because they're challenging. They interfere with that status quo. They interfere with that belief that I can just go along with blah, blah, blah and be okay. Do I really believe in the healing of the sick through the power of this mind? Do I really believe in the control of conditions? Or are these things I can't control? We get to ask ourselves that question again and again and again, because it's not self-evident what the answer is. Because we've had these stories in our minds of learned helplessness, of I can't because. And some of those, like they're kind of sort of valid, and some of them we've made up. It's that green growing edge of our becoming that Hildegard von Bingen talked about. We get to decide where that edge is, and it's not something that's fixed. It's not something that's always the same. It changes from moment to moment to moment. So what are sickness and illness and conditions? Is that just another way to say limitations? Yeah. So what do we really have control of? And what can we be free of? Dr. Holmes gave us a clue about what he was thinking in his little book, The Art of Life, which is one of my favorites, page 41. These statements are wonderful, and they're horrible, because they make it quite clear what's out of our control and what's not. And most of you will recognize this paragraph. Life works by direct affirmation. There's no other way for it to work. This is why we are told to be still and know that all things are possible to God. We are told to affirm, positively to assert, to declare this truth in the face of all apparent opposition, to claim abundance in the midst of poverty, to affirm health in the midst of sickness, to decree joy in the midst of sorrow, and to announce the kingdom of God here and now. What's out of our control? Dr. Lisa Rankin, whose book Mind Over Medicine we used last year in a book study, has a new book out, and it's called Sacred Medicine. She's an MD, trained, licensed, etc., who recognizes and defends this idea that the body has innate wisdom for healing. And she wrote, as part of an interview she gave with some folks, when you're happy, relaxed, and free of stress, the body can accomplish amazing, even miraculous feats of self-repair. Our bodies are designed to self-repair, to self-heal, as soon as we quit believing and telling them that they can't. Some people believe that specific activities or specific actions are necessary specific health regimes are necessary for them to heal. And because that's what they believe, that's what's true for them. That's just kind of how the package works. So I have one more story before I quit talking. And this is from reading Dr. Norman Doidge's The Brain That Changes Itself that I read earlier this year. And there's a belief that the brain deteriorates as it gets older. And Dr. Norman says, no, that's made up. We've made that story up. And yet, we get to check ourselves anytime we are thinking that our brains aren't working as well as they used to because fill in the blank. And one of the things that Dr. Norman recommended to counteract that story, that experience, that apparent limitation, was brain exercise. But not just any exercise. He had a long list of things that were good, but not exceptional, for challenging the brain to be sharp, to be flexible, to be up for the challenge of creating whatever is necessary for next. And we've got the list, right? Sudoku, crossword puzzles, free cell, Wordle, Quirtle, Nerdle game, digital. I play them all. They're fun. But they're easy. And they're lazy. Mostly. They don't use the new muscles. They don't make us up-level our mental game. And I realize that what I'm about to say is kind of on shaky ground, because remember, it's as we think. So Dr. Norman suggested that there's a thing that assists us in keeping our brain sharp, and if we believe it, it works, right? So I've been playing with this new technology for 32 days so far, and I have noticed a difference in my mental state. I have noticed a difference in my ability to feel sharp. Is it the game? Is it my belief that the game is helping? As you believe, so it is for you. And so we've got that going all the time. And what's interesting to me with this particular game that he has that's really annoying to me is I notice how irritated I get in playing this game. Because the way the thing is set up, you are supposed to fail half the time. I hate failing. And his point, their point, the scientist's point is you learn when you fail. You don't learn when you succeed. Doesn't that suck? Right? If it's easy, if I can play free cell and, win 4 games in a row in less than 4 minutes, my brain doesn't learn anything. But if I'm actually having to pay attention and notice and fail about half the time, then my interest, my engagement is way higher. Because it's like, what do you mean I'm not doing well? How dare you? I'm 2 again saying no. I appreciate that challenge of if it's easy, it's not worth much. If it takes a little work, then it has value. And that's part of my belief system, and I recognize that. And I know it works for me. If that's not your belief system and you're happy with easy, rock on. And for me, I know that if it's too easy, I can get lazy. So I want to close with a small piece from today's reading from the Science of Mind text on page 470. This section falls at the end of Dr. Holmes' extensive discussion of the story of the prodigal son. and the story of his older brother. Holmes wrote, "God cannot give us anything unless we are in a mental condition to accept the gift. The law can't do anything for us unless it does it through us. Belief is absolutely necessary to right demonstration. We are on the path of experience, just waking up to the fact of our true being. As we awake, we find we are surrounded by many false conditions. But there is something within which remembers our real state. If one will sit in quiet contemplation of good as an inner experience, they will experience the good which they contemplate. As a prodigal returns to his father's house, so we must return, not with a morbid mind, but consciously and definitely, with direct intent and a complete concentration of purpose. The journey back to our divine self, to our holy presence, should be filled with happiness and joyful expectation, for we shall be met with a smile from the universe and shall be folded in the arms of love forever. We free ourselves from external limitations when we realize we created them in the first place. We created the experience of feeling limited. And we already have everything we need to create a different reality, free of those limitations. Each one of us gets to do that for ourselves, daily, hourly, minutely. As we do that, we bless ourselves, and then we can bless each other. Thank you. So now, if I've said anything useful to you, hold it in your mind while I speak these words of positive affirmation. I celebrate this thing called life. I celebrate this opportunity to be one in the one. I celebrate this opportunity to be one in all of humanity, in all of life. And I know that that life lives in me, as me, and through me, in and as and through all beings. I know each already as divine. I know each as already whole, complete, and perfect. And I know each as already on the trajectory of their choosing towards the life that they desire to experience, that they're willing to allow themselves to experience. And I know this truth for me and for all beings. I know that each has the opportunity to wake up and step into a greater experience of life. The gift already has been given. It's up to each one to receive it. So I celebrate this opportunity to gather together. I celebrate this opportunity to see and know and be and do and live in this life of love. Experience this joy, experience this delight. And know that each one has gifts to give to the world. And I celebrate each one who does. Relaxing into the truth of these words, I let them be. And so it is.